A homeless Navy SEAL cut open a giant tree in the mountains. Then his dog uncovered a secret someone killed to hide. After losing everything, former Navy SEAL Caleb Mercer lived quietly beneath Montana's Bitterroot Mountains, with only his loyal K9 Ghost beside him. But when a storm exposed a massive fallen tree, Ghost sensed something hidden inside. What Caleb found beneath the bark was not a natural mystery. It was a forgotten secret that would pull him back into a fight he thought was over. Comment 1 if you believe Caleb and Ghost did the right thing, or 0 if you would have walked away. Tell us where you're watching from. The Bitterroot Mountains of Montana did not care who you used to be. They did not care about medals, missions, victories, or the names carved into military records. The mountains only cared about one thing: whether you could survive another cold night beneath their shadow. At the edge of a forgotten logging road, surrounded by endless pine forests, an old gray pickup truck sat beneath a group of towering trees. The paint was faded. The tires were worn. The windows carried scratches from years of wind, snow, and mountain dust. To most people passing by, it looked abandoned. But every morning before sunrise, a man stepped out of that truck. His name was Caleb Mercer. At 39 years old, Caleb had already lived several different lives. Once he had been the kind of man people trusted with impossible situations. A Navy SEAL who moved through darkness when others ran from it. A soldier trained to remain calm when everything around him was falling apart. A man whose job was to protect others, even when protecting them meant putting himself in danger. But now, the only thing most people saw was a tired man sleeping in an old truck beside a mountain road. They did not see the years of training. They did not see the sacrifices. They did not see the nights when memories from places he never talked about pulled him awake before dawn. They only saw a homeless man. And Caleb had learned that sometimes being invisible was easier than explaining why. The morning air was sharp enough to sting his lungs as he opened the truck door. Frost covered the windshield, and his breath appeared in the cold air like smoke. Before Caleb moved, another figure inside the truck lifted his head. Ghost. The German shepherd had been watching him. The dog was older now, but age had not erased what he was. His body carried small reminders of his years of service. Old scars beneath thick fur, a slight stiffness in one back leg, and the quiet seriousness of a dog who had spent his life reading danger before humans could see it. Ghost was not just a pet. He was Caleb's partner, the one living thing that stayed when everything else disappeared. "Morning, buddy," Caleb whispered. Ghost slowly climbed out of the truck and stretched his legs. He looked toward the forest first, scanning the tree line out of habit, before turning back to Caleb. That simple movement always reminded Caleb of the past. The dog still checked the world before allowing himself to relax. Just like him. Caleb reached into the truck and pulled out a small metal cup. He poured water into it and placed it near Ghost. The dog drank quietly. For a moment, standing beside the truck, surrounded by mountains and silence, Caleb felt almost normal. Almost. Then the memories came. A flash. A dark hallway. A sudden explosion. The sound of shouting through a radio. The weight of responsibility. The feeling of knowing someone's life depended on the next decision he made. Caleb closed his eyes and forced himself back into the present. The mountains. The cold air. The sound of Ghost breathing beside him. Not there. Here. He had learned techniques for dealing with the memories. Breathe. Focus. Name what was real. The old instincts that once kept him alive in combat had become the same instincts that sometimes trapped him years later. He looked down at Ghost. The dog noticed. He always noticed. Ghost stepped closer and pressed his shoulder against Caleb's leg. A small gesture. A simple reminder. Caleb placed his hand on the dog's neck. "I'm okay," he said quietly. Ghost looked up at him. Caleb almost smiled. They both knew he was lying, but neither of them argued. Life in the mountains had become a routine built around survival. Caleb worked wherever someone needed extra hands, repairing fences, carrying supplies, clearing brush, helping ranchers move equipment. Whatever paid enough to keep fuel in the truck and food in Ghost's bowl. He never stayed anywhere too long. People asked questions. Questions he did not want to answer. Where was his family? Why was a former soldier living like this? What happened to him? Caleb never knew how to explain that coming home had been harder than leaving. The battlefield had rules. Civilian life did not. Out there, he knew exactly what his purpose was. Here, he was just another man trying to figure out where he belonged. By late morning, Caleb drove his truck down the mountain road toward the small town of Pine Hollow. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone. A gas station, a hardware store, a small church, a diner that had been there longer than most of the buildings around it. The diner was called Mountain View Cafe. The sign outside was faded, but the coffee inside was always hot. Caleb usually avoided places where people remembered him, but there was one person who never made him feel like a problem to solve. Martha Ellis. She was 72 years old and had owned the diner for nearly 3 decades. She had silver hair, kind eyes, and the unusual ability to notice things other people ignored, like the fact that Caleb always sat with his back facing the wall, like the fact that Ghost never slept deeply unless Caleb was close, like the fact that Caleb always counted exits without realizing he was doing it. Martha never asked him why. She simply accepted him. When Caleb walked through the diner door, the bell above it rang softly. A few customers looked up, then quickly looked away. Caleb was used to that. Martha looked over from behind the counter. "You're late," she said. Caleb glanced at the clock. "I'm 3 minutes early." Martha smiled. "That's late for you." A small smile appeared on Caleb's face, the first real one that morning. Ghost lay beside his chair while Caleb drank coffee and ate the meal Martha placed in front of him. He had not ordered. She already knew. "You don't have to keep doing this," Caleb said. Martha wiped the counter. "I know." He looked confused. "Then why?" "Because sometimes people need help before they're ready to admit they need help." Caleb looked down at his coffee. He did not know how to answer. Martha glanced toward Ghost. "That dog understands you better than most people ever will." Caleb followed her eyes. Ghost was resting, but one ear was still raised. Always listening. "He saved my life," Caleb said. Martha nodded. "I believe that." The answer surprised him. Most people wanted details. They wanted stories. They wanted proof. Martha simply believed him. Outside the diner window, the mountains stretched endlessly toward the sky. beautiful, quiet, and impossible to escape. Caleb finished his meal, thanked Martha, and walked back toward his truck. The town continued moving around him. Cars passed, people talked, doors opened and closed, but somehow Caleb Mercer remained unseen. A man who had spent years protecting others had become someone most people walked past without noticing, except for one old woman and one loyal dog. As Caleb drove back toward the mountains, Ghost rested in the passenger seat beside him. The road climbed higher. The buildings disappeared. The forest grew thicker. Caleb looked ahead at the endless wilderness. He did not know it yet, but the mountains were about to give him a reason to stop running. A storm was coming. And hidden somewhere deep inside those woods was something waiting to be found. Something that would change everything. But before Caleb Mercer discovered what the forest had been hiding, the mountains first had to reveal what they had taken away. 3 days later, the Bitterroot Mountains woke beneath a sky that looked like it had been torn apart. The storm arrived without warning. For nearly 24 hours, violent winds pushed through the valleys, bending trees until their trunks groaned like old wooden ships caught in a storm. Heavy rain poured over the mountain roads, washing away dirt paths and turning familiar trails into rivers of mud. The people of Pine Hollow had seen storms before, but this one was different. When the clouds finally moved east and sunlight returned, the damage left behind was impossible to ignore. Power lines were down. Small roads were blocked. Several families living deeper in the mountains were cut off from town. The county needed help, and help meant people like Caleb. The call came early in the morning. A local contractor named Daniel Reeves was organizing a crew to clear the old logging roads before another storm system moved in. Caleb knew Daniel from previous jobs. No unnecessary questions, no sympathy, just honest work for honest pay. That was exactly what Caleb preferred. When Daniel saw him arrive with Ghost walking beside him, he simply nodded. Road 12 is the worst section, Daniel said. Trees came down everywhere. We need it open before the weekend. Caleb looked toward the mountains. The same mountains that had always made him feel small. The same mountains that somehow also made him feel calm. How many people are out there? Caleb asked. 3 crews, but the upper section is rough. Caleb nodded. I'll take it. Daniel looked at Ghost. That dog coming too? Caleb glanced down. Ghost was already watching the forest. He goes where I go. Daniel smiled slightly. Figured you'd say that. The crew started before sunrise. Chainsaws roared through the quiet mountain air. The sound echoed between the trees, mixing with the distant rush of water flowing down from the higher slopes. For most people, the work was exhausting. For Caleb, it was familiar. There was comfort in tasks with clear answers. A fallen tree, a blocked road, a problem that could be solved with patience and effort. No paperwork, no complicated conversations, no pretending to be someone he wasn't. Just work. Ghost moved ahead along the road, occasionally stopping to inspect the surroundings. He was older now, but the instincts remained. His nose tested the wind. His eyes studied movement between the trees. Every few minutes he looked back at Caleb. Not because he needed permission. because that was their language. A silent conversation built over years. Caleb would never forget the first time he met Ghost. The dog had been young then, confident, fearless. During deployment, Ghost had been trained to search, alert, and protect. But somewhere along the way, Caleb realized the dog had done something no training manual could explain. Ghost had saved more than his life. He had saved the part of Caleb that wanted to give up. That morning, as sunlight broke through the damaged forest canopy, Caleb felt something he had not felt in a long time. Peace. Not happiness, not yet. But peace. A quiet moment where the past stayed where it belonged. Behind him. By noon, the crew had already cleared several hundred yards of road. Branches were stacked along the sides. Broken trees were cut and moved away. The mountain slowly began returning to normal. Caleb stood beside his truck, drinking water, while Ghost rested in the shade. Daniel walked over. You know, most guys would have taken the easy section. Caleb looked at him. Someone had to take the hard one. Daniel laughed softly. That answer sounds exactly like something a SEAL would say. The words hung in the air. Caleb's expression changed slightly. Not anger, not sadness. Something quieter. A reminder. Daniel noticed. He immediately changed the subject. Anyway, we should finish this road by tomorrow if the weather holds. Caleb nodded. The conversation ended there. That was another reason he respected Daniel. He knew when not to ask. The afternoon passed slowly. The forest smelled of wet earth and fresh-cut pine. Water dripped from branches overhead. Birds slowly returned after hiding from the storm. For the first time in months, Caleb felt like he was part of something again. Not a mission, not a unit. Just a group of people trying to help their neighbors. And somehow, that mattered. As the sun began sinking behind the mountains, Caleb packed his tools. Ghost stood beside him. The dog looked tired, but alert. You ready? Caleb asked. Ghost lifted his head. A small movement. A simple answer. They walked back toward the truck together. But halfway there, Ghost stopped. Caleb noticed immediately. The dog was looking toward the forest. Not afraid, not aggressive, just focused. Caleb followed his gaze. Nothing. Only trees. Only shadows. Something there? Ghost remained still for a moment. Then he looked back at Caleb and continued walking. Caleb watched him carefully. Years of military training had taught him something important. Animals noticed things humans missed. But sometimes instincts were wrong. Sometimes the mind searched for threats because it had spent too long surrounded by them. Caleb understood that better than anyone. He placed a hand on Ghost's back. Not today, buddy. Ghost looked up at him, then continued beside him. That night, Caleb parked his truck near the edge of the forest. The mountains became dark silhouettes beneath a sky filled with stars. Inside the truck, he sat quietly with Ghost lying beside him. The old heater struggled against the cold. The silence was complete. For a moment, Caleb allowed himself to believe that maybe this was enough. Maybe a simple life was possible. Maybe he did not need to chase the person he used to be. Outside, the wind moved through the trees, a low whisper across the mountain. Caleb closed his eyes. He almost fell asleep. Then Ghost lifted his head. The dog stared toward the darkness beyond the windshield, listening, waiting. Caleb opened his eyes. "What is it?" Ghost did not move. The forest outside remained still. But somewhere far beyond the reach of the headlights, something had changed. Something Caleb could not see. Something Ghost could feel. And tomorrow, when they returned to finish clearing the road, the two of them would find the first sign that the storm had uncovered more than broken trees. It had uncovered a secret. The next morning arrived colder than Caleb expected. A thin layer of frost covered the ground, turning the muddy logging road into a mixture of ice and dirt. The mountains stood silent beneath a pale gray sky, their peaks hidden behind a blanket of low clouds. Caleb parked his truck at the edge of the damaged road and stepped outside. Ghost jumped down beside him. The dog immediately scanned the area. Caleb noticed. He always noticed. Ghost was not nervous, not yet. But there was something different. The German shepherd walked slower than usual, his nose working constantly as he studied the air around them. Caleb grabbed his gloves and tools from the truck. "You feel something out there?" Ghost looked at him briefly, then turned back toward the forest. Caleb sighed. After all these years, he still had trouble admitting when Ghost was right before he understood why. The first few hours passed normally. The crew continued clearing the road. Chainsaws cut through fallen timber. Heavy branches were dragged away. The mountain slowly revealed the path that had been buried by the storm. Caleb worked quietly, moving from one fallen tree to another. He liked the rhythm. Cut, move, clear, repeat, simple, predictable. But around mid-morning, something changed. A large pine tree had fallen diagonally across the road farther up the slope. It was enormous. The kind of tree that looked like it had been standing longer than the people who tutafakvud beneath it. Its trunk was thick enough that two men standing side by side could barely wrap their arms around it. Daniel Reeves stopped beside Caleb. "That one's going to take some time." Caleb looked over the tree. The roots had been ripped from the ground during the storm, leaving a massive hole filled with dark soil and broken stone. The tree had fallen with incredible force. Caleb approached slowly. Something about it caught his attention. Not the size, not the damage, something else. Ghost followed him. The dog walked around the fallen pine, sniffing along the bark. Then he stopped. Caleb watched. Ghost had found something. "What is it?" The dog did not answer, of course. But he did something unusual. He placed his nose close to the trunk and breathed in slowly. Then he looked at Caleb. Caleb walked closer. He studied the tree. At first, everything looked normal. Old bark, deep cracks, moss growing along one side, storm damage, nothing unusual. He reached out and touched the surface. The bark was cold and wet. "Probably just a weak spot," Caleb said quietly. He picked up the handle of his axe and tapped the trunk. Once, twice. The sound was normal. A deep wooden knock. Then he moved farther down the tree and tapped again. This time, he stopped. The sound was different. Caleb stared at the trunk. He tapped again. A hollow echo answered. Not the sound of a damaged tree. Not the sound of empty space caused by ordinary decay. Something deeper. Something wrong. The noise seemed to travel inside the tree before disappearing. Ghost immediately reacted. His ears moved forward. His body became still. A low sound came from his throat. Not a bark, not panic, a warning. The kind of warning Caleb had heard hundreds of times before. His hand slowly lowered. The forest seemed quieter. Even the wind felt like it had stopped. Daniel looked over. Everything okay? Caleb did not answer immediately. His eyes stayed on the tree. Yeah, he finally said. But his voice lacked confidence. Daniel walked closer. What happened? Caleb tapped the trunk again. The hollow sound returned. Daniel frowned. That's strange. Caleb nodded. He had heard hollow trees before. Trees damaged by disease. Trees eaten from the inside by insects. Trees weakened by fire or age. But this was different. The sound was too deep, too empty, like something inside the trunk was missing. Daniel ran his hand along the bark. Could be rotten inside. Maybe. But Caleb did not believe that. Not completely. His instincts had kept him alive for years, and right now, those instincts were telling him something did not fit. The crew continued working nearby, but Caleb remained beside the tree. Ghost refused to leave. The dog circled it slowly. Then he stopped at one specific area near the middle of the trunk. He lowered his head, pressed his nose against the bark, and sat down. Caleb stared. That behavior was familiar. Too familiar. During his military years, Ghost had been trained to detect things hidden from human senses. Weapons, explosives, movement, threats. The dog did not waste energy. If Ghost was focused on something, there was always a reason. Caleb crouched beside him. What are you telling me? Ghost looked at the tree, then back at Caleb. For a second, Caleb felt that old feeling again. The feeling of being on a mission. The feeling that something important was hidden just beyond his understanding. A memory surfaced. A dark underground passage. Concrete walls. A teammate whispering through a radio. A moment when everyone thought the area was clear. Until Ghost had stopped. Until Ghost had warned them. Caleb blinked. The memory disappeared. He was back in Montana, back beside a fallen tree, back with the only partner who had followed him through every version of his life. He slowly stood. Caleb? Daniel's voice pulled him back. You okay? Caleb looked at the tree, then at Ghost. I'm fine. It was the same answer he always gave, but this time he wasn't sure. The rest of the crew moved on to another section of the road. Caleb stayed behind for another minute. He placed his hand against the rough bark. The tree was cold, silent, ordinary, at least from the outside. That was what bothered him most. It looked like every other fallen tree in the forest, but something inside it was different. Something hidden. Something waiting. Finally, Caleb picked up his chainsaw. The machine roared to life, cutting through the quiet morning. Ghost stepped back but never looked away. The first cut went smoothly. Fresh wood sprayed from the blade. The smell of pine filled the air. Caleb worked carefully, following the natural cracks created by the storm. Then the blade reached deeper. And suddenly, the chainsaw changed sound. The vibration shifted. Caleb pulled back immediately. He shut the machine off. Silence returned. He stared at the cut. There was no visible metal, no obvious object, nothing that explained what had happened. But Ghost was already standing beside him, waiting. Caleb ran his hand along the cut edge. The wood inside looked strange, too smooth, too clean. He leaned closer. A cold feeling moved through him. This was not just a hollow tree, not just storm damage. Something had happened here long before the storm arrived. And somehow, the storm had uncovered it. Caleb looked toward the endless forest surrounding them. Thousands of trees. Thousands of secrets. He had spent his entire life learning how to recognize danger. But now, for the first time in years, he felt something unfamiliar. Curiosity. And curiosity was dangerous. Because once a man starts looking for answers, sometimes he finds things he was never meant to see. Ghost gave a quiet warning sound. Caleb looked back at him. The dog was staring at the tree. Not afraid. Not confused. Certain. Caleb slowly reached for his flashlight. The work could wait. The road could wait. Because for the first time since leaving the military, Caleb felt like he was standing at the beginning of a mission. And this time, his partner had found the target. Caleb Mercer stood beside the fallen pine tree, with the chainsaw hanging at his side, listening to the silence that had returned after the machine stopped. The forest around him looked exactly the same as it had moments before. Tall pines stretched toward the gray sky. Water dripped from branches left heavy by the storm. The distant sound of his crew working continued farther down the road. Everything appeared normal. But Caleb knew better than most people that danger rarely announced itself. Sometimes it was loud, sometimes it was obvious, and sometimes it was hidden beneath something that looked harmless. He looked down at Ghost. The German shepherd had not moved. The dog remained fixed on the tree, body still, eyes focused. Caleb had seen that posture before. Not at home, not on a quiet mountain road, in places where mistakes had consequences. During missions where every second mattered, Ghost had never been the type of dog to react without reason. That was what made Caleb uneasy. "Come on, Ghost." Caleb stepped away from the tree. The dog did not follow. For a moment, Caleb simply stared. Years ago, he would have trusted that reaction immediately. But life after the military had taught him another lesson. Sometimes the past followed you. Sometimes your mind searched for threats because it had been trained to find them. A fallen tree was just a fallen tree. A strange sound was just a strange sound. At least that was what Caleb tried to tell himself. He walked back toward Ghost. "You're getting old, you know that?" The dog glanced at him. Caleb almost smiled. You used to find trouble faster than anyone. Ghost stood. For 1 second, Caleb thought the dog was finally listening. Then Ghost moved around him and returned to the same spot. The same exact spot. Caleb's expression changed. That was not random. He crouched down beside the tree. What are you sensing? Ghost lowered his nose toward the bark. Then he scratched once. A single paw movement. Precise, intentional. Caleb felt the hairs rise slightly on his arms, because he knew that signal. Ghost was not curious. He was alert. Caleb placed his hand on the tree and looked carefully. The bark was damaged from the storm, but underneath the cracks, there were unusual lines. At first, they looked like natural breaks. Then he noticed something else. The marks followed a pattern. Not perfectly, not clearly, but enough to make him pause. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his flashlight. The sun was already above the trees, but inside the cracks of the trunk, the light disappeared quickly. He turned the flashlight on and aimed it into the opening created by the chainsaw. A narrow gap appeared. Darkness waited inside. Caleb leaned closer. The smell reached him first. Not fresh wood, not rot. Something older. Dry. Empty. His breathing changed slightly. He recognized that feeling. The moment before entering a place you could not see. The same feeling before clearing a building. Before moving into unknown territory. His chest tightened. The old memory came back. A narrow passage. Concrete pressing close on both sides. The sound of his own breathing inside his helmet. A teammate behind him whispering. Something's wrong, Caleb blinked. The forest returned. The mountain air returned. Ghost was beside him. Not a battlefield, not a mission, just a tree. He slowly exhaled. Not there anymore, he whispered. Ghost looked at him. The dog did not understand the words, but he understood Caleb. He always did. Caleb stepped back. He knew what he should do. Call forestry services. Let experts inspect it. Walk away. That was the responsible choice. But every instinct inside him resisted. Not because he wanted danger, because something about this did not make sense. He had spent years reading environments, understanding what belonged, understanding what did not. And this tree did not belong to the forest anymore. Something had changed it. Something had left a mark. The rest of the crew was still working. Daniel would probably tell him to stop wasting time, and maybe he would be right. Caleb looked toward the road, then back at Ghost. The dog was waiting, not pushing, not demanding, just waiting. That was what made Ghost different. He never forced Caleb. He simply showed him the truth and trusted him to make the decision. Caleb picked up his tools. 5 minutes. Ghost watched him. Then we go. The dog did not move. Caleb grabbed his axe and tapped the damaged area carefully. The sound returned. Hollow, deep, wrong. He moved around the trunk. The fallen pine was massive. The storm had ripped it from the ground, exposing roots covered in mud and stones. Near the base, Caleb noticed something unusual. The inside of the trunk was darker than it should have been. He cut another small opening. This time he went slower. The blade moved through the outer layer easily, too easily. The wood gave almost no resistance. Caleb stopped. A tree this large should have been dense, heavy, strong. Instead, the inside felt fragile, like the tree was only pretending to be solid. Ghost stepped closer, then immediately stepped back. His ears lowered slightly. Caleb noticed. The dog was not interested in entering. He was warning him. Okay. Caleb lowered the chainsaw. Okay, I hear you. For the first time that morning, Caleb admitted what he had been avoiding. Ghost was not reacting to the tree. Ghost was reacting to what was inside it. The realization changed everything. Caleb looked at the opening again. A dark space waited beyond the broken wood. A place no one could see from the outside. A place hidden for a reason. The wind moved through the trees. The forest seemed to breathe around him. Caleb remembered something his old commander once told him. Your instincts are built from everything you survived. Don't ignore them just because they make you uncomfortable. Back then, Caleb thought instincts were only useful in combat. Now he wondered if they mattered everywhere. He placed the chainsaw on the ground. Then he removed his gloves. Slowly, carefully, he reached toward the opening. His fingers touched the inside edge. Smooth. Not rough. Not broken. Smooth. Caleb froze. Natural decay did not feel like this. The inside of the tree was not simply empty. It had been changed. His eyes moved toward Ghost. The dog was staring directly at him. Caleb understood. The mission had changed. This was no longer about clearing a road. It was about finding the truth. He grabbed his flashlight again. The beam disappeared into the darkness inside the tree. For a moment, he saw nothing. Then the light moved deeper, and Caleb felt his stomach tighten. Because hidden inside the fallen pine was a space that should not have existed. A hollow passage, a tunnel inside a tree, and someone had created it. Caleb slowly stood back. The mountain suddenly felt much larger, much quieter. He looked around the forest. Thousands of trees surrounded him, thousands of places where something could be hidden. He looked back at Ghost. The dog had been right from the beginning. Caleb had spent years learning to trust his own instincts. But somewhere along the way, he forgot the most important lesson. Sometimes the person beside you sees the danger before you do, and sometimes that person has 4 legs. Caleb Mercer remained beside the fallen pine, staring into the darkness hidden beneath the tree's broken surface. For several seconds, he did nothing. He simply listened. The forest had a way of making small sounds feel larger. The drip of water from a branch, the movement of leaves in the wind, the distant rumble of machinery from the other workers. But beneath all of it was something else. A silence around the tree, almost as if the forest itself was waiting. Ghost stood beside him, watching carefully. Caleb had learned a long time ago that silence was not always peaceful. Sometimes silence was information. He reached for his flashlight again. The beam entered the opening. At first, all he saw was darkness. Then the light moved deeper, and slowly, the impossible shape of the inside began to appear. Caleb frowned. The tree was not damaged. It was empty. Not naturally empty. Not the kind of hollow left behind by years of insects or disease. This was different. The inner walls were smooth, almost polished. The wood had been removed carefully, leaving behind a narrow passage that stretched farther than he expected. Caleb lowered the flashlight. His mind searched for an explanation. Maybe the storm had exposed a strange natural formation. Maybe some rare condition had weakened the tree over decades. Maybe there was something he was missing. But every explanation disappeared the longer he looked, because the inside was too clean, too intentional. He had spent most of his life around forests. He knew trees. He knew what damage looked like. This was not damage. This was alteration. Someone had changed the tree. Caleb looked at Ghost. The dog remained several feet away. That was unusual. Ghost was trained to approach unknown objects carefully, but he was not afraid to move forward. If anything, the dog's hesitation made the situation more serious. "You don't want me going in there?" Ghost stared at him. Caleb nodded slowly. "Yeah, I know." He looked back into the opening. Every instinct told him to stop. The smart choice was simple. Leave it alone. Call someone. Wait. But Caleb had never been good at ignoring unanswered questions. That same trait had made him valuable in the military. It was also the reason he had found himself in difficult situations. He took a deep breath. Then he reached into his truck and grabbed a larger flashlight, a small toolkit, and a rope. Not because he expected trouble, because preparation was a habit that never left. When he returned to the tree, Ghost followed but stayed close to the entrance. Caleb widened the opening carefully. He worked slowly. No unnecessary cuts, no sudden movements. Every action controlled, the kind of discipline that came from years of training. As pieces of wood fell away, more of the hidden space became visible. The tunnel continued farther inside. Caleb shined the flashlight along the walls. The beam moved across surfaces that looked almost carved. There were no random patterns, no natural cracks, no signs of ordinary decay. The inside of the tree had been shaped. His breathing became slower, controlled. But inside his mind, old memories started pushing forward. A narrow underground passage, dark walls, limited visibility. The feeling of moving into a place where someone else had already been waiting. Caleb closed his eyes for a moment. He felt his heart rate increase. His hand tightened. Then Ghost moved closer. The dog placed his head against Caleb's leg. A small action, but it pulled him back. Not there. Here. Not then, now. Caleb looked down. Good timing. Ghost blinked. Caleb took another breath. The past was powerful, but it was not the present. He returned his attention to the tree. Carefully, he lowered himself into the opening. The space was tight, not impossible, but uncomfortable. The bark pressed against his shoulders. The air inside was colder than outside. The smell was strange. Dry wood, dust, something old. Caleb moved forward slowly. His flashlight illuminated the tunnel ahead. A few feet inside, he stopped. The walls widened. The hollow was larger than he expected, almost like a small room. He slowly turned the light around. There were no animal nests, no signs of insects, no natural explanation, only empty space, created space. Caleb touched the wall. The surface was smooth beneath his fingertips. He felt a chill. Someone had spent time here. A lot of time. He backed out slightly and looked toward Ghost. The dog was standing at the entrance, watching, waiting. Caleb whispered, "I know." Ghost lowered his head. Caleb understood the message. Something about this place was wrong. He moved deeper one more time. The flashlight revealed small sections along the wall. Notches. Marks. At first, Caleb thought they were cracks. Then he realized they were too consistent, too straight. His military instincts returned. Observation, pattern recognition, details, the things most people ignored. Someone had worked inside this tree. The thought settled heavily. Why? Why hide inside a tree? Why create a secret space in the middle of a remote forest? He moved backward carefully until he was outside again. The fresh mountain air felt different. He looked at the tree. From the outside, it was still just a fallen pine, broken by a storm. Nothing more. But inside was a secret. A hidden place. A place someone had made sure nobody would find. Caleb stood quietly. The same feeling returned. The feeling he had before missions. The moment when something small became something bigger. Ghost walked around the tree again. This time, the dog stopped near the opening and looked toward the deeper part of the trunk. Then he looked at Caleb. Caleb noticed something. Ghost was not searching anymore. He was waiting. As if he knew Caleb had only seen the beginning. The rest of the afternoon passed with Caleb barely speaking. The crew continued clearing the road, unaware of what he had found. Daniel eventually walked over. "You disappear on us?" Caleb looked up. "Just checking something." Daniel glanced at the tree. "You find anything?" Caleb hesitated. A part of him wanted to say no, not because he wanted to hide it, because saying it aloud made it real. Finally, he answered, "I think someone changed this tree." Daniel looked confused. "What do you mean?" Caleb looked back at the fallen pine. "I mean, it wasn't made empty by nature." Daniel studied his face. He knew Caleb well enough to recognize when something was serious. "You sure?" Caleb nodded. "I'm sure." The two men stood there in silence. Then Daniel looked toward the forest. "How long has it been like that?" Caleb had no answer, and that bothered him. Because if someone created this place, someone might have used it. And if someone used it, there was a reason. Before leaving for the day, Caleb returned to the tree one last time. The sunlight was fading between the mountains. Long shadows stretched across the forest floor. He looked into the hollow again. The darkness inside seemed deeper now. Not because it had changed, because he understood what it was. A hiding place, a secret, a question waiting for an answer. Caleb turned away. "We'll come back tomorrow." Ghost looked at the tree, then followed. But neither man nor dog noticed the small detail hidden farther inside the darkness. A mark. A trace. A sign that they were not the first ones to enter. And they would not be the last. Caleb Mercer barely slept that night. The old truck sat beneath the Montana sky, surrounded by endless forest and mountains that disappeared into darkness. The heater struggled against the cold, making small clicking sounds every few minutes. Normally, the sounds of the wilderness helped him rest. The wind, the trees, the distant movement of animals. Those sounds had once been a reminder that he was away from everything. Away from noise. Away from memories. But tonight was different. Every time Caleb closed his eyes, he saw the inside of that tree. The smooth walls, the empty passage, the impossible space hidden inside something that looked ordinary. He had spent years learning how to identify threats. But this was different. There was no enemy. No weapon pointed at him. No obvious danger. Only a question. And sometimes, questions were harder to ignore than threats. Beside him, Ghost lifted his head. Caleb opened his eyes. "You're awake too?" The German shepherd looked toward the window. Caleb followed his gaze. The forest outside was still. Nothing moved. But Ghost continued watching. Caleb placed a hand on the dog's shoulder. "You know something I don't." Ghost looked at him. That was the problem. The dog always seemed to know. Before sunrise, Caleb made his decision. He was going back. Not because he was chasing danger, not because he wanted to prove anything, because leaving something unexplained had never been part of who he was. He started the truck and drove toward the logging road. The morning was colder than the day before. Mist covered the lower parts of the mountains, drifting between the trees like smoke. When Caleb reached the fallen pine, Ghost jumped out first. The dog immediately went to the opening, not rushing, not panicking, just focused. Caleb grabbed his equipment and followed. The tree looked different in the morning light, not because it had changed, because Caleb knew what was underneath. He knelt beside the opening and turned on his flashlight. The beam moved across the inside walls, the same smooth surface, the same unnatural shape. But now he looked closer. Yesterday, he had been searching for an explanation. Today, he was searching for evidence. That difference mattered. He crawled inside carefully. The space was still tight. The air was dry and stale. Every movement disturbed small clouds of dust that floated through the flashlight beam. Caleb moved deeper. Then he stopped. Something was different. Near the far side of the hollow, the wall had marks. Not cracks. Marks. He leaned closer. Long lines ran across the wood. Parallel. Repeated. Purposeful. Caleb slowly traced one with his glove. Someone had scraped this surface. Not once. Many times. He sat back. The realization was heavier than he expected. This was not just a hidden space. Someone had worked here. Someone had spent hours, maybe days, creating this place. He moved the flashlight across the floor. That was when he saw it. A small piece of material caught between the wood fragments. Caleb reached down and picked it up. It was old, faded, but unmistakable. Fabric. Not from the tree, not from the forest. Human. He turned it over in his hand. A piece of cloth. Maybe from a jacket. Maybe from a bag. There was no way to know. But one thing was certain, someone had been here. Ghost gave a low sound from the entrance. Caleb immediately looked back. The dog was staring outside. Alert. Caleb froze. Ghost. The dog remained still, then slowly relaxed. Nothing appeared. No movement. No footsteps. Only trees. Caleb waited several seconds before moving again. That moment reminded him of something important. The danger was not always what you found. Sometimes it was the possibility that someone else was looking too. He continued searching. Near another section of the hollow, he found something else. A thin piece of rope. Old. Dry. Almost falling apart. Caleb held it carefully. The rope told a story. Not the whole story. But enough. Someone had used this place. Maybe for storage. Maybe for shelter. Maybe for something worse. He looked around the hollow again. The carved space suddenly felt smaller. The walls felt closer. The forest outside felt farther away. Caleb backed out slowly. When he stepped into the sunlight, he took a deep breath. Ghost immediately came beside him. Caleb looked at the items in his hands. The cloth, the rope. Small things. Almost meaningless. But together, they changed everything. Because before today, he had a strange tree. Now he had proof. Someone had been there. Someone had created a secret inside the mountain forest. Caleb placed the items carefully into a small evidence bag he kept in his truck. He was not collecting souvenirs. He knew better. Everything found at a possible scene had a purpose, a story, a reason it existed. He walked around the tree, studying the outside. The fallen pine looked peaceful, almost beautiful. That was what bothered him most. Something dark could hide beneath something ordinary. He had seen that before. Not in forests, in people, in places, in situations where everything looked normal until the moment it wasn't. The thought brought back memories. A village overseas, a quiet building, a mission that appeared simple. Then everything changed. Caleb closed his eyes briefly. Ghost moved closer. The dog leaned against him. Again. The same silent reminder. Present. Not past. Caleb opened his eyes. Thank you. Ghost looked up. The rest of the day, Caleb struggled to focus on work. Every tree looked different. Every shadow seemed longer. Every sound made him pause. Daniel noticed. You're somewhere else today. Caleb continued cutting a fallen branch. Just thinking. Daniel nodded. About that tree? Caleb stopped. You believe me? Daniel looked surprised by the question. Why wouldn't I? Caleb looked down. Most people would have laughed. Most people would have told him he was imagining things. But Daniel simply accepted that Caleb had seen something unusual. "I found things inside." Daniel's expression changed. "What kind of things?" "Signs someone was there." The two men looked toward the forest. Daniel lowered his voice. "Should we call someone?" Caleb did not answer immediately. That was the question. The responsible answer was yes, but part of him hesitated. Not because he wanted to keep a secret. Because once authorities arrived, everything would change. The forest would no longer be quiet. The tree would no longer be a mystery. It would become evidence. And Caleb understood better than most what happened when something became evidence. People stopped seeing a story. They only saw a problem. That evening, Caleb returned to the tree one more time. The sun was disappearing behind the mountains. Golden light moved across the bark. Ghost walked around the trunk, then suddenly stopped. The dog looked toward the deeper forest. Caleb noticed. "What is it?" Ghost did not move. A few seconds passed. Then the dog lowered his head and returned to Caleb. But the message was clear. Something had changed. Caleb looked between the trees. Nothing. Only darkness slowly spreading across the mountain. He tightened his jacket. The strange tree had started as a curiosity. Then it became a question. Now it was becoming something else. A warning. Because whoever created this hidden place had left behind more than a hollow tree. They had left behind evidence, and evidence always belonged to a story. The only question was, what kind of story had Caleb and Ghost just uncovered? For the next 2 days, Caleb tried to convince himself that the answer could wait. He told himself the tree was old. The forest was full of forgotten things. People lost tools. Campers left behind supplies. Storms uncovered objects that had been buried or hidden for years. There were explanations. There were always explanations. But every time Caleb looked at Ghost, he knew the dog did not believe any of them. And neither did he. The German shepherd had changed since they found the hollow tree. He still moved with the same quiet confidence. Still walked beside Caleb. Still watched the mountain trails. But now, every time they passed near the fallen pine, Ghost slowed down. Not because he was afraid, because he was waiting. Waiting for Caleb to understand something he had already discovered. On the third morning, Caleb made the decision. He returned to the tree, alone. Or at least, that was what he told himself. Ghost was already standing beside the truck when Caleb opened the door. The dog looked at him. Caleb sighed. "You're coming." Ghost wagged his tail once. A small victory. The drive into the mountains was quiet. The storm damage had made the road rougher, and the truck moved slowly over broken branches and deep tire marks. The forest looked different now, not because it had changed, because Caleb knew there were secrets beneath the surface. Every fallen tree became a question. Every shadow became a possibility. When they arrived, the fallen pine waited exactly where they left it. The morning sun filtered through the branches, creating patterns of light across the bark. For a moment, it almost looked peaceful. Almost. Caleb grabbed his equipment. Ghost moved toward the tree. This time he did not stop at the entrance. He walked around the trunk. Then he stopped at a section near the center, the same place he had focused on before. Caleb approached. "What's here?" Ghost lowered his head. His paw touched the ground. Once, twice. Caleb watched carefully. The dog was not scratching. He was indicating. Caleb cleared away the loose dirt and broken pieces of bark. At first, he saw nothing. Then the edge of something appeared. Not wood, not stone. Metal. Caleb froze. He moved the dirt away slowly. A small piece of metal emerged from beneath the debris. His heart began beating faster. He had expected something. But not this. Not metal. He grabbed his gloves and carefully removed more dirt. Within minutes, he uncovered a small metal container. Not large, not heavy enough to be a toolbox, but strong. Designed to last. Caleb stared at it. The container was covered in rust, but underneath the damage he could still see its original purpose. This was not something someone accidentally dropped. This had been placed here. Hidden, protected, waiting. Ghost stood beside him, watching. Caleb ran his hand over the surface. A strange feeling moved through him. He had discovered many things during his military career. Weapons, equipment, evidence. Things people wanted hidden. But this felt different. Because someone had gone to great lengths to hide it inside a tree. A tree in the middle of nowhere. A tree that nobody would have noticed if the storm had not knocked it down. Caleb looked around the forest. The mountains were silent. Too silent. He lifted the container. It was heavier than expected. Something inside shifted slightly. Caleb stopped. There was something inside. He looked at Ghost. The dog immediately became alert. Not aggressive. Ready. Caleb carried the container away from the tree and placed it on a flat section of ground. He studied the lock, old, corroded, still sealed. Part of him wanted to open it immediately. Curiosity pulled at him, but training told him to slow down. Unknown objects required patience, especially hidden objects. He reached toward the lock. Ghost suddenly moved. The dog grabbed the sleeve of Caleb's jacket gently but firmly. Caleb stopped. Ghost. The dog pulled backward, not biting, not attacking. Stopping him, the same way he had stopped him before. Caleb looked at the container, then at the dog. A cold feeling moved through him. Because Ghost was not reacting to the object. He was reacting to Caleb touching it. Caleb slowly lowered his hand. The forest became completely still. No birds, no wind, nothing. Only the two of them beside an old metal box hidden inside a fallen tree. Caleb took a slow breath. Okay. He stepped back. Ghost released his sleeve. Caleb looked at the dog. You saved me from doing something stupid more times than I can count. Ghost sat beside him. Caleb almost laughed. Almost. But the weight of the moment remained. He picked up the container again carefully. This time he did not try to open it. Instead, he examined the area around the tree. That was when he noticed something else. A mark, small, carved into the bark near the opening. Not natural, not from the storm. A symbol. Caleb stepped closer. The shape was simple, but deliberate. Someone had marked this place. A location marker. A warning. Or a message. He photographed it with his phone. Then he stepped back. His instincts were now fully awake. This was no longer an interesting discovery. This was a situation. And situations had consequences. Caleb carried the container back toward his truck. Every few steps, Ghost stopped and looked behind them. Caleb noticed. "You feel watched." Ghost did not answer, but he did not need to. Caleb had felt it too. Not a clear threat. Not someone standing in the open. Something more subtle. The feeling of being somewhere you were not supposed to be. When they reached the truck, Caleb placed the container in the back. He covered it with a blanket. Then he stood there for a long moment. He thought about his life, about how hard he had worked to stay invisible. No attention, no complications, no people asking questions. Finding this box destroyed all of that. Because now he had a choice. He could ignore it, pretend he never saw it, drive away, continue living quietly, or he could do what he knew was right. The same thing he had always done. Protect what needed protecting. Even when nobody thanked him. Even when nobody knew his name. Ghost sat beside him. Caleb looked down. You really know how to ruin a quiet life. The dog looked up. For the first time that day, Caleb smiled. A small smile, but real. Then Ghost suddenly turned. His ears lifted. His body became still. Caleb followed his gaze. Across the forest line, something moved. Only for a second. A shadow between the trees. Gone before Caleb could identify it. His entire body reacted before his mind did. He stepped slightly in front of Ghost. Scanning. Listening. Waiting. The old instincts returned. The ones he thought he had left behind. Someone was out there. Or had been. Caleb slowly reached for his phone. The box was no longer just a mystery. It was a reason someone might come looking. And for the first time since finding the tree, Caleb understood something. The danger was never inside the box. The danger was whoever had been hoping nobody found it. Caleb Mercer stood beside his old truck, staring into the trees where the shadow had disappeared. For several seconds, he did not move. The mountains had gone quiet again. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that made a person notice every small sound. A branch shifting. A bird moving through leaves. The distant movement of water running down the hillside. Caleb listened. Years of training had taught him that fear was not the enemy. Ignoring fear was. He slowly reached down and placed his hand on Ghost's collar. The dog remained focused on the tree line, not barking, not chasing, just watching. That told Caleb everything. Ghost was not certain what was out there, but he knew something was. Caleb carefully opened the truck door and placed the metal container inside the cab. He did not take his eyes off the forest. The old instinct inside him was awake now, the one he had spent years trying to quiet, the one that counted distance, movement, possible positions, possible exits. He hated how familiar it felt, because a part of him missed it, and another part of him was terrified that he still needed it. "Come on, Ghost." The dog jumped into the passenger seat. Caleb started the engine. He did not drive away quickly. That would have been a mistake. Fast movement showed panic. Instead, he pulled away slowly, watching the mirrors. The forest disappeared behind them, but the feeling remained. Someone had been there. Someone had seen them. And someone knew Caleb had found something. Back in Pine Hollow, Caleb parked behind the Mountain View Cafe. Martha Ellis was already inside preparing the morning meals. When Caleb walked through the back door, she looked up immediately. One glance at his face told her something was wrong. "You look like you haven't slept." Caleb removed his jacket. "I haven't." Martha looked toward Ghost. The dog walked inside but did not lie down. Instead, he stayed close to Caleb. That was unusual. Martha noticed. "What happened?" Caleb hesitated. He had spent years keeping things to himself. It was a habit, a survival skill. But this was different. He trusted Martha, not because she had answers, because she never demanded them. "I found something in the mountains." Martha waited. "A tree." She raised an eyebrow. "A tree?" Caleb nodded. "Not exactly." He explained everything: the hollow trunk, the carved interior, the rope, the metal container, the shadow in the forest. Martha listened without interrupting. When he finished, she looked toward the window. The mountains were visible in the distance. Dark. Silent. "You think someone was watching you?" Caleb looked down. "I know what I saw." Martha nodded. "That wasn't my question." Caleb looked at her. She continued. "Do you think someone was watching you?" The question stayed in the air, because the answer mattered. Caleb finally said, "Yes." Martha became quiet. Then she reached across the counter and placed a cup of coffee in front of him. "You know what your problem is?" Caleb almost smiled. "Probably a long list. You spend your whole life protecting everyone else." She looked at Ghost. "But you forget someone has to protect you too." Caleb looked away. Those words were harder to hear than he expected. Later that afternoon, Caleb drove to the sheriff's office. The metal container remained locked in the truck. He had not opened it. He had not touched it again. But before he could explain everything, something happened. A black pickup truck passed him near the edge of town. Nothing unusual, except the driver slowed down. Just enough, Caleb noticed. The truck continued, but his eyes stayed on the mirror. Ghost lifted his head. The dog had noticed too. Caleb turned onto another road. The black pickup continued straight. Maybe coincidence, maybe nothing. But Caleb knew better than to ignore patterns. At the sheriff's office, he met Sheriff Cole Bennett. Cole was a man in his 50s who had spent most of his life protecting Pine Hollow. He knew Caleb. Not well, but enough. Enough to know that Caleb was not someone who created problems. If Caleb came to him, there was a reason. "You found something?" Caleb nodded. They walked outside to the truck. When Cole saw the container, his expression changed. "That came out of a tree?" "Yes." Cole studied it. "Have you opened it?" "No." "Good." The sheriff looked at him. "You did the right thing." Those words surprised Caleb. He was used to people questioning him, doubting him, noticing his problems before noticing his experience. But Cole simply accepted the information. They called additional officers. The area around the tree would need to be examined. The container would need to be handled properly. But before they could leave, Caleb received a call. The number was unknown. He answered. Silence. No voice, just breathing. Caleb looked at Ghost. The dog was standing now. Alert. "Hello?" Nothing. Then the call ended. Caleb stared at the phone. Sheriff Cole noticed. "Everything okay?" Caleb slowly lowered the phone. "I don't think they wanted to talk." The sheriff's expression hardened. "Who?" Caleb looked toward the mountains. "I don't know." And that was the part he hated most. Not knowing. That evening, Caleb returned to the forest with Sheriff Cole and 2 deputies. The sun was disappearing behind the peaks. The temperature dropped quickly. The group walked toward the fallen pine. Ghost moved ahead. Not running. Searching. The sheriff noticed. "That dog always like this?" Caleb nodded. "He doesn't waste energy." They reached the tree. The hollow opening remained exactly as they left it. But something was different. Caleb saw it immediately. The ground. Near the entrance were fresh marks, not animal tracks. Boot prints. Someone had been there. Recently. The sheriff crouched down. "When?" Caleb looked at the tracks. "After we left." The words changed the atmosphere instantly. The forest no longer felt empty. It felt occupied. The deputies searched the surrounding area. Nothing. No person, no vehicle, no obvious sign of who had been there. But the message was clear. Someone had returned. Someone new. Ghost suddenly turned toward the deeper woods. A low growl escaped. Caleb immediately looked in the same direction. This time he saw it too. A movement. A figure. Far away. Between the trees. Gone. The sheriff reached for his radio. "Stay together." Caleb barely heard him. His focus remained on the forest. The old feeling was back. The feeling of being hunted. But this time he was not overseas. He was home. And somehow, that made it worse. Because he had spent years believing the hardest battles were behind him. He was wrong. The battle had simply changed. Caleb looked down at Ghost. The dog stood beside him. Ready. Faithful. Unmoving. Caleb placed his hand on the dog's shoulder. A silent promise passed between them. Whatever was coming, they would face it together. Because the tree had revealed its secret. But now Caleb understood something even more important. Secrets were rarely buried alone, and whoever hid this one was not finished protecting it. The words followed Caleb Mercer long after he left the forest. That night, the old truck felt smaller than ever. The mountains outside were silent, but the silence no longer brought comfort. It carried questions. Who had created the hidden space inside the tree? Who had placed the metal container there? Who had returned after Caleb found it? And most importantly, how much did they know about him? Caleb sat in the driver's seat with the engine off, staring through the windshield. The metal container rested in the passenger seat. Ghost lay beside it. The dog had refused to move away from the box since they returned. Not touching it, not afraid of it, simply watching. Caleb understood. Ghost was waiting for Caleb to make the right choice. And that was the hardest part. Because Caleb had spent years avoiding choices that brought attention. After leaving the military, he had learned that disappearing was easier. No questions, no explanations, no reminders of the man he used to be. When people did not know your story, they could not judge it. But now, hiding was no longer an option. Something inside that container mattered. Something someone wanted to keep hidden. Caleb looked at his reflection in the dark window. For a moment, he saw two versions of himself. The soldier who always moved toward the danger, and the man who had spent years running from everything that reminded him of it. He closed his eyes. The memory came quickly. A mission years earlier. A team waiting for his decision. A moment when hesitation could cost lives. Back then, he trusted his instincts. Now he questioned them. Why? Because the battlefield was gone. The uniform was gone. The purpose was gone. But maybe the responsibility never disappeared. Caleb opened his eyes. Ghost was watching him. You think I already know what to do? The dog tilted his head slightly. Caleb shook his head. Of course you do. For the first time all day, he laughed quietly. A small sound, but real. Then he looked back at the container. The decision was still there. The next morning, Caleb returned to the Mountain View Cafe. Martha was already waiting. She did not ask how he was. She already knew. You made a decision, she said. Caleb stopped. How do you know? Because people who are still afraid look around the room. She placed a cup of coffee on the counter. People who have decided something look straight ahead. Caleb looked down. He had spent years surrounded by people trained to read him. But Martha somehow saw things nobody else noticed. I'm calling the sheriff. Martha nodded. No surprise, no fear, just understanding. Good. Caleb looked at her. That's it? What else should I say? I don't know. Martha smiled gently. You already know what's right, Caleb. He looked toward Ghost. The dog was lying near the door. Relaxed. For once. He's the reason I'm doing it. Martha smiled. No. She shook her head. He's the reason you remembered who you are. The words stayed with him. Because they were true. Caleb met Sheriff Cole Bennett near the station later that afternoon. The sheriff looked at the container again. This time, several officers were present. They photographed it, documented it, prepared everything properly. Caleb stood nearby, quiet, watching. A younger deputy approached. "You okay?" Caleb looked at him. "Yeah." The deputy smiled. "You always answer that?" Caleb almost smiled. "Usually." The deputy nodded. "My grandfather was a Marine." Caleb looked surprised. He always said veterans hate admitting when something bothers them. Caleb looked toward Ghost. "Your grandfather was right." The deputy glanced at the dog. "He's been through a lot too, hasn't he?" Caleb nodded. "He has." The conversation ended there. No speeches, no dramatic words, just understanding. Sometimes that was enough. By late afternoon, Sheriff Cole organized a team to return to the tree. Caleb went with them. Not because he had to, because he needed to. The forest looked different with law enforcement around. The quiet paths were filled with movement. Boots pressed into the soil. Equipment was carried through the trees. But somehow, Caleb still felt connected to the place. He had found the secret. Now he needed to see what it meant. When they reached the fallen pine, Ghost moved ahead. The officers watched carefully. The dog approached the opening, then stopped. The sheriff looked at Caleb. "He always knows?" Caleb nodded. "Usually before I do." They began searching the area. The container was placed safely aside while investigators examined the tree. Every detail mattered. The carved walls, the markings, the hidden chamber. Then one of the officers called out, "Sheriff." Everyone turned. The officer was standing near the base of the tree. He held something in his hand. A small piece of paper. Old, folded, protected inside a plastic covering. Caleb walked closer. The officer opened it carefully. Inside were markings, coordinates, several locations throughout the mountains. The sheriff's expression changed. "What is this?" Caleb looked at the map. He did not know, but he understood one thing. The tree was not the secret. The tree was only one piece. That evening, they opened the metal container under controlled conditions. Caleb watched from a distance. The lid finally opened. Inside were items carefully stored. Maps, equipment records, documents, evidence of illegal activity across multiple areas of the wilderness. The sheriff became silent. Not shocked, concerned. This is bigger than one location. Caleb looked at him. How much bigger? The sheriff looked toward the mountains. "We don't know yet." That answer bothered Caleb, because he had learned one thing during his years in service. Unknown problems were the most dangerous. The investigation expanded quickly. More officers were assigned. More areas were searched. And the strange truth began to emerge. The hidden tree was not an isolated discovery. It was part of something much larger. A network of hidden locations throughout the forest. Places built to avoid detection. Places hidden where nobody would think to look. But one person had noticed. One dog had found what everyone else missed. Late that night, Caleb sat outside his truck. The stars covered the sky. Ghost rested beside him. For the first time in years, Caleb did not feel like he was running. He looked toward the mountains. The same mountains where he had arrived with nothing. No home, no clear future. Only an old truck and a loyal dog. Now he had something else. Purpose. Maybe he had lost his place in the world. Maybe he had lost the life he expected. But maybe he had not lost everything. Ghost placed his head against Caleb's leg. Caleb rested his hand on the dog's fur. You were right from the beginning. The dog closed his eyes. Caleb looked toward the dark forest. The mystery had grown larger. The danger had grown closer. But something inside him had changed. For years, he believed his best days were behind him. He was wrong. Because sometimes life does not bring you back by giving you what you lost. Sometimes it brings you back by showing you what you still have. And Caleb Mercer still had a mission, a partner, and a reason to stand again. For the first time in a long time, Caleb Mercer woke up without feeling like he was only surviving. The mountains were still cold. The old truck was still small. The road ahead was still uncertain. But something inside him had shifted. For years, Caleb had believed his purpose disappeared the day he left the battlefield. He thought the missions were over. He thought the only thing left was learning how to live with the memories. But standing beside Ghost beneath the Montana sky, he realized something. Purpose did not belong to a uniform. It belonged to the person wearing it. And sometimes, the next mission found you when you were not looking for one. The investigation moved quickly. Within 48 hours, the quiet forest near the Bitterroot Mountains became the center of attention. Sheriff Cole Bennett brought in additional investigators. Wildlife officers arrived. Federal agents joined the operation after seeing the evidence recovered from the hidden container. Caleb watched the activity from a distance. People moved through the forest carrying equipment. Maps were studied. Reports were created. The secret that had been buried for years was finally being brought into the open. But Caleb noticed something. Nobody treated Ghost like just a dog. They watched him. They respected him. Because every time investigators reached a dead end, Ghost seemed to notice something they missed. A scent. A path. A place where the ground looked different. The dog never rushed, never panicked. He simply followed what he knew. Sheriff Cole stood beside Caleb as Ghost examined another section of forest. I've worked this county 25 years, Cole said. Caleb looked at him. Never seen anything like this. The sheriff shook his head. No. He looked around at the endless trees. That's what bothers me. Caleb understood. The forest was enormous. A person could hide almost anything inside it, and most people would never know. The search continued deeper into the mountains. The first discovery had been the fallen pine. But it was not the only one. A wildlife officer found another hidden location several miles away. Then another. Not identical, but connected. Hidden spaces, old storage areas, places designed to disappear into the wilderness. The evidence began forming a picture. Someone had been using the mountains as a hiding place for years. Not randomly, not accidentally. Organized. Caleb studied the maps spread across the hood of a truck. The marked locations created a pattern. "These points aren't random," he said. The investigators looked at him. Caleb traced the map with his finger. "They're connected." Sheriff Cole stepped closer. "How?" Caleb looked at the terrain. Access routes, distance between locations, places where someone could move without being noticed. The federal agent standing nearby looked impressed. "You've done this before." Caleb was quiet. The answer was obvious. "Yes." The agent nodded. "Then your experience is useful here." Useful. That word stayed with Caleb. It was something he had not felt in years. Not needed. Not tolerated. Useful. 2 days later, investigators opened another hidden compartment discovered beneath a fallen tree. This time, Ghost found it. The dog stopped near a patch of ground covered by leaves and branches. The officers searched the area. Beneath the surface, they discovered a sealed container. Inside were documents, photographs, records connecting several people involved in illegal activity throughout the region. Sheriff Cole looked through the information carefully. This explains a lot. Caleb watched him. "What?" The sheriff looked up. "Why nobody ever found them?" He pointed toward the forest. They weren't hiding from the wilderness. He looked at Caleb. They were using it. That sentence stayed with everyone, because it changed the meaning of the discovery. The forest was not just where the evidence was found. It was part of the plan. As the investigation expanded, the truth became clearer. The people involved had used remote areas because they believed nobody would notice. They counted on distance, silence, isolation, the same things that had once made Caleb feel safe. But they made one mistake. They underestimated someone who understood those things better than they did, a former Navy SEAL, and his K-9 partner. That evening, Caleb stood near the original tree. The fallen pine was surrounded by evidence markers now. Photographs. Records. Investigators documenting every detail. It looked completely different from the first day. Back then, it had been a mystery. Now it was proof. Ghost sat beside him. Caleb looked down. "You knew." The dog looked toward the tree. "You knew something was there." Ghost remained quiet. Caleb smiled slightly. "You always make me work for the answer." The dog lowered his head. A familiar gesture. Caleb looked toward the mountains. The investigation had revealed the truth. But something still bothered him. The people responsible had hidden these locations carefully. They had planned. They had prepared, which meant they would not simply disappear. People who built secrets rarely gave them up easily. The following morning, Sheriff Cole called Caleb. They found the people responsible for several of the locations. Caleb listened. Arrests are being made. Relief moved through him. Not excitement, not victory. Relief. Because every hidden place they discovered meant fewer chances for someone else to be harmed. But then Cole continued. "There's something else." Caleb became still. "What?" "One of the suspects knew about the tree before we arrived." Caleb's expression changed. "How?" The sheriff paused. We're still figuring that out. The answer brought back the same feeling from before. The feeling of being watched. The feeling that someone had been one step ahead. Caleb looked toward Ghost. The dog was already standing. Alert. Waiting. That night, Caleb returned to the forest with Sheriff Cole. They wanted to inspect the original location one more time, not because they expected something new, because experience had taught Caleb something important. The first thing you find is rarely the whole story. The forest was dark when they arrived. The moon created silver shapes between the trees. Ghost moved ahead. Slow. Focused. Then he stopped. Caleb immediately noticed. What is it? Ghost stared toward the tree. Not the opening. The ground beside it. Caleb walked closer. Near the roots, hidden beneath layers of soil and leaves, was something small. A piece of metal. Old, but recently disturbed. The sheriff picked it up carefully. Everyone became silent, because attached to it was a marking. The same symbol found near the hidden container. Caleb looked toward the dark forest. The mystery was not finished. Not even close. The tree had revealed what was hidden beneath. But now they understood something much more dangerous. The people who created those hiding places had not only buried evidence, they had left behind a trail. And someone was still following it. For the first time in weeks, Caleb Mercer understood that the danger was no longer hidden. It was moving. The discovery inside the fallen tree had started as a mystery. Then it became an investigation. Then it became something much bigger. But now, standing beneath the cold Montana sky, Caleb felt something he had not felt since leaving the military. A warning. Not from fear, from experience. The kind of feeling that came before something changed. Sheriff Cole Bennett felt it too. That was why the two of them stood near the edge of the forest long after the investigation teams had left for the evening. The mountain was quiet, but neither man believed it was peaceful. Cole looked at the evidence marker near the tree. You think someone came back? Caleb looked toward the dark line of trees. I think someone never really left. The sheriff was silent, because he knew Caleb was not guessing. He was reading the situation, the same way he had learned to read everything else. Over the next several days, the investigation continued. Authorities identified several people connected to the hidden locations. Evidence from the containers helped uncover illegal operations that had been active in the mountains for years. The community of Pine Hollow was shocked. People who had lived beside those forests their entire lives never imagined what had been happening in the places they trusted. The mountains that represented peace and freedom had been used as a hiding place for people who believed nobody would ever look closely enough. But someone did. Caleb. And Ghost. News reporters began arriving in town. They wanted the story. The former Navy SEAL who discovered the hidden tree. The dog who found what everyone else missed. The mystery in the mountains. But Caleb avoided them. He did not want attention. He had never wanted it. Martha understood. They're trying to make you the story, she said one morning at the diner. Caleb looked at his coffee. I'm not. Martha smiled. No. She looked toward Ghost. But he might be. Caleb glanced at the dog lying near the entrance. For the first time in years, Ghost had become known by people who had never met him. A hero, a protector, a survivor. But to Caleb, he was still just Ghost. His partner. Then came the night everything changed. The storm had passed days earlier, but the mountains remained cold. Caleb was sleeping in his truck when Ghost woke him. Not with barking, not with panic, just one movement. The dog lifted his head. Caleb opened his eyes immediately. Years of training made him wake quickly. What is it? Ghost stared toward the forest. Caleb sat up. The silence was different. He knew that now. There was normal silence. And there was the silence before something happened. He slowly reached for his flashlight. Outside, the mountain road was covered in darkness. No headlights. No voices. Nothing obvious. But Ghost was already standing. Caleb stepped out of the truck. The cold air hit his face. He looked around. Then he saw it. A vehicle parked farther down the road. Lights off. Engine cold. Watching. Caleb did not move. Neither did Ghost. They waited. Seconds passed. Then the vehicle started. The headlights flashed briefly through the trees and disappeared. Caleb watched the road until the sound faded. The old instincts inside him were fully awake now. Someone had come close. Someone had wanted to see if he was still there. The next morning, Sheriff Cole arrived. "You're sure?" Caleb nodded. "Ghost woke me before I saw anything." The sheriff looked toward the forest. "We found tire marks." Caleb said nothing. Cole continued. Same type of vehicle reported near one of the other locations. The connection was clear. Someone involved in the operation was still moving. Someone who had not been caught. That evening, Caleb returned to the forest. Not alone. Ghost was beside him. The investigation team had secured the area, but Caleb wanted to check the original location one more time. The tree stood quietly among the others, a reminder of everything that had happened. Caleb walked around it slowly. Then Ghost stopped. The dog looked toward the trees. Caleb followed his gaze. Nothing. Then a sound. A branch breaking. Caleb immediately turned. A figure moved between the trees. Gone. He stepped forward. Ghost moved first. Not attacking, protecting. Caleb stopped him with a command. "Stay." The dog froze. Caleb moved carefully. Not chasing. Observing. The person was not trying to confront them. They were trying to reach something. Something near the original hiding place. Caleb moved around the side. And then he saw him. A man kneeling near the tree, searching. Caleb spoke calmly. "Step away." The man froze. For a moment, nobody moved. Then the man turned. His face showed surprise. Not anger, not confidence, fear. He had not expected Caleb to be there. The man ran. Caleb followed for only a few steps before stopping. The forest was too dark, too unpredictable. Ghost returned immediately. But then Caleb noticed something. The dog was hurt. A small cut on his side from pushing through the branches. Nothing severe, but enough. Caleb dropped beside him. "Hey." Ghost looked at him, the same calm eyes, the same loyalty. Caleb touched the injury carefully. A wave of emotion hit him harder than expected. Not fear, not anger, something deeper. Because in that moment, he remembered, Ghost had done this his entire life. Military missions, dangerous roads, long nights, and now here, still protecting him, still putting himself between Caleb and danger. Caleb lowered his head. "You don't have to do that anymore." Ghost looked at him. But they both knew the truth. The dog was not protecting him because he had to. He was protecting him because he loved him. At the veterinary clinic in Pine Hollow, Caleb waited beside Ghost. The injury was minor. The veterinarian assured him the dog would recover. But Caleb barely heard the words. He sat there thinking about everything. The years he spent believing he was alone. The years he thought his purpose was gone. And the one companion who never accepted that. Ghost had never seen Caleb as broken, never seen him as lost, only as his partner. Martha arrived at the clinic carrying coffee. She sat beside him. "He's going to be okay." Caleb nodded. "I know, but you're not thinking about him." Caleb looked at her. Martha smiled sadly. "You're thinking about all the times he protected you." Caleb looked through the window toward Ghost. "Yes." Martha placed a hand on his shoulder. "Maybe he knew something you didn't." "What?" "That you were still worth protecting." Caleb looked away. Because those words hurt. But they were the kind of pain that healed. 2 days later, authorities announced that the remaining suspects had been located. The network hidden beneath the mountains was finally exposed. The forest was safe again. But Caleb knew something had changed. He came to the mountains looking for a place to disappear. Instead, he found a reason to be seen. He found a purpose. He found proof that the life he thought was over was not over. One evening, Caleb sat outside his truck beside Ghost. The dog was recovering well. The mountains were quiet again. But this time the silence felt different. Not empty. Peaceful. Caleb looked toward the forest. The tree. The secret. The danger. Everything that had brought him here. Then he looked at Ghost. "You know," he paused, "I think you found that tree because you knew I needed it." Ghost closed his eyes. Caleb smiled. Maybe the dog did not understand the words, but he understood everything else. And somewhere deep inside the Bitterroot Mountains, a story that had been hidden for years finally came to an end. Not with a battle, not with a victory speech, but with a man realizing he was never truly alone. 3 weeks after the discovery in the Bitterroot Mountains, life in Pine Hollow slowly began returning to normal. The news crews were gone. The government vehicles were gone. The forest paths that had been filled with investigators and evidence markers were quiet again. The mountains had returned to their natural rhythm. Wind moving through the trees, rivers flowing down the valleys, birds calling from the branches. For most people, the story was over. A strange discovery, A successful investigation. A criminal operation stopped. A headline that eventually disappeared beneath newer ones. But for Caleb Mercer, the story had changed something much deeper. Because he had not only discovered what was hidden inside a tree, he had discovered something hidden inside himself. A part of him he thought was gone forever. Purpose. Ghost recovered faster than anyone expected. The veterinarian said the old German shepherd was stronger than his age suggested. Caleb was not surprised. He had seen ghosts survive things most people never would. But this time the recovery was different. There was no mission waiting, no danger ahead, no reason to rush back into action. For the first time in years, Ghost was simply allowed to be a dog. He spent mornings lying in the sun outside Caleb's truck. He walked slowly along the mountain roads. He watched the forest. Not because he was searching for threats, because he loved the place. Caleb noticed the difference. And maybe that was the biggest lesson Ghost had taught him. Survival was important, but survival is not the same as living. The offer came from Sheriff Cole Bennett a few days later. Caleb was standing outside the sheriff's office when Cole approached him. "You know, the county could use someone like you." Caleb looked confused. "What do you mean?" Cole handed him a folder. A position. A steady job. Helping with wilderness safety. Search operations. Training younger officers on mountain awareness. Nothing behind a desk. Nothing that would make him feel trapped. Something meaningful. Caleb stared at the folder. For years, he had searched for a place where he belonged, but he never expected someone to offer him one. "I don't know if I'm the right person." Cole smiled. "That's exactly why you are." Caleb looked at him. The sheriff continued. "People who think they're perfect usually aren't the ones you want helping others." Caleb looked down. Those words stayed with him. Because they reminded him of something Martha had said. Maybe he was not broken. Maybe he was simply rebuilding. A month after the storm, Caleb finally left the old truck behind. Not because he hated it. The truck had carried him through the hardest years of his life. It had been his shelter, his escape, his only home when he felt like he had nowhere else to go. But now it was time for something different. Martha helped him find a small cabin near the edge of the mountains. Nothing luxurious. Just a simple wooden place surrounded by trees. A porch. A fireplace. Enough space for him and Ghost. When Caleb opened the door for the first time, Ghost walked inside slowly. The dog inspected every room, then returned to the doorway and looked at Caleb. Caleb smiled. "You approve?" Ghost sat down. Caleb laughed softly. "I'll take that as a yes." For the first time in many years, Caleb had a key to a place that belonged to him. Not borrowed, not temporary. His. The town changed too. People who once ignored Caleb now stopped to talk. Not because of the story, not because of the attention, because they finally saw him. The man behind the silence. The veteran who spent years protecting strangers. The person who helped uncover something dangerous but never asked for recognition. At the Mountain View Cafe, Martha watched as Caleb sat with other customers. A few months earlier, he would have chosen a corner table. Back against the wall. Eyes watching every entrance. Now he still noticed exits, some habits never disappeared. But he laughed more, he spoke more, he stayed. And that was the difference. One evening, as the sun began disappearing behind the mountains, Caleb and Ghost returned to the forest. The same forest where everything had started. The air was cool. The sky was painted orange and gold. The original fallen pine was still there. The investigation had removed the evidence markers. The tree had begun returning to the earth. Nature slowly reclaiming what humans had changed. Caleb stood beside it quietly. A lot had happened there. Fear, doubt, discovery, change. Ghost walked around the old trunk, then returned to Caleb. The dog looked older now, but his eyes were the same. Caleb placed a hand on his head. You know, when I first met you, I thought I was the one protecting you. Ghost looked up. Caleb smiled. I was wrong. The dog leaned against him. Caleb looked across the mountains. The place that once represented loneliness now felt different. It was still wild, still powerful, still unpredictable, but it no longer felt empty. Because he understood something now. Home was not always a building. Sometimes home was the person who stayed beside you when everything else disappeared. Before leaving, Caleb walked deeper into the forest. Not far. Just enough to enjoy the quiet. Ghost followed. The two moved between the trees like they had done countless times before. Then Caleb stopped. A large pine stood beside the trail. Old, massive, similar to the one that started everything. He smiled slightly. Don't tell me. Ghost looked at the tree. Caleb stepped closer. For a moment he felt something strange. A memory. A question. A possibility. He reached out and tapped the trunk lightly with the back of his hand. Once. The sound was solid. He smiled. See? Then he tapped again. This time, a different sound answered. A hollow echo. Caleb froze. The forest became silent. Ghost slowly raised his head. His ears moved forward. The same expression, the same focus, the same certainty. For a moment, Caleb felt the old feeling return. The unknown. The mystery. The question waiting beneath the surface. But this time he was different. He was not the man living alone in an old truck. He was not the man hiding from his past. He was Caleb Mercer, former Navy SEAL, partner of Ghost. A man who had already faced one hidden secret. He looked at the tree, then looked at his dog. A small smile appeared. Not today. Ghost watched him. Caleb placed a hand on the dog's back. Some mysteries were meant to be uncovered. Others were reminders that the world was bigger than anyone could understand. The sun disappeared behind the mountains. The forest grew darker, and together, the man and the dog walked back toward home, leaving the tree behind. For now. Because deep in the wilderness, beneath the silence of the mountains, secrets remained. Waiting. Listening. And somewhere out there, another story was already beginning. If you believe loyalty, courage, and doing the right thing still matter, comment 1 below and tell us where you're watching from. Stories like Caleb and Ghost remind us that true strength comes from never giving up when it matters most. Subscribe and stay with us for more stories of justice, dignity, and perseverance from the people who stand their ground.